The semi-truck ran the red light at 45 miles per hour. One moment Jake and I were discussing his college applications, the next we were upside down in my Honda glass, everywhere the taste of copper filling my mouth. "Dad," Jake whispered from the passenger seat, blood trickling from his forehead. "I'm here, buddy." I managed, feeling my ribs screaming with each breath. The ambulance sirens grew louder as I typed with shaking fingers into our family chat. "We're in the hospital. Alive but shaken." Then I waited for someone to care, or... The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos around us, but all I could focus on was the notification sound that never came. My phone sat silent on the plastic chair beside Jake's gurney, the family chat message still showing as delivered but not yet read. "Mr. Harrison, we need to get your son to radiology for a CT scan." The nurse said, her scrubs decorated with cheerful cartoon characters that seemed absurd in this fluorescent-lit nightmare. "His pupils are responding normally, but we want to rule out any brain injury." Jake squeezed my hand with surprising strength for someone who'd just been thrown around like a rag doll. "I'm okay, Dad. Just dizzy." Blood had dried in his dark hair, and a purple bruise was already forming around his left eye. My 17-year-old kid, who'd been talking about senior prom and graduation plans just hours ago, now looked fragile and small against the white hospital sheets. "I know you are, buddy. You're tougher than your old man." I forced a smile, while my cracked ribs sent lightning bolts of pain through my chest with every breath. The doctor had already confirmed 3 fractured ribs and a mild concussion for me, plus enough bruising to make me look like I'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight boxer. As they wheeled Jake away for his scan, I finally heard the familiar ping of my phone. My heart jumped with relief until I saw it was just a spam message about extending my car warranty. The irony wasn't lost on me. I opened the family group chat and stared at my message from 2 hours ago. The little indicator now showed read by 7, but still no responses. Not even a heart emoji. The chat that usually exploded with commentary about everything from political opinions to what someone had for lunch sat dead quiet when it actually mattered. "Excuse me, sir, is there anyone we can call for you?" The registration clerk, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, looked at me with genuine concern. "Family or friends who might want to know about the accident?" "Oh, my family knows." I held up the phone, the lie bitter in my mouth. "They're probably on their way." She nodded and returned to her paperwork, but I caught the sympathetic look she shared with the nurse. They'd been doing this job long enough to recognize the signs of someone sitting alone in a crisis. I scrolled through my contacts, thumb hovering over my sister Sarah's number. We'd always been close, especially after our parents' divorce when I was 15 and she was 12. I'd helped her through college, been the best man at her wedding, never missed one of her kids' birthday parties. Surely she'd want to know that Jake and I had nearly died today. But something stopped me from calling. If she'd read the message and chosen not to respond, what did that say? The thought was too painful to examine closely. Jake returned from radiology with a clean bill of health beyond a mild concussion, and I felt the first real relief since the accident. "No brain damage," he announced with a weak grin. "Doc says I'm as hard-headed as you always claimed." "That's my boy." I ruffled his hair carefully, avoiding the bandaged cut on his forehead. "We're going home in a few hours." "Cool. Maybe Grandpa and Aunt Sarah will come by the house later to check on us." Jake's voice held a note of expectation that made my chest tighten, for reasons that had nothing to do with broken ribs. "Maybe," I said, though my phone remained stubbornly silent. By evening, we were back in our small apartment on Maple Street. Jake crashed on the couch, exhausted from the day's trauma, while I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop trying to focus on insurance paperwork. Every few minutes, I'd check my phone. Still nothing. That's when I made the mistake of opening Instagram. Sarah's story was the first thing I saw. A series of bright, cheerful photos from what looked like a restaurant brunch. The caption read, "Family first best Sunday ever," followed by 3 heart emojis. There was my niece Emma, radiant in a yellow sundress, surrounded by balloons and gift bags. There were my parents, my brother David, his wife, even my cousin Mark and his family. All smiling, all celebrating, all perfectly healthy and happy. I scrolled through the comments, my stomach dropping with each notification. Heart eyes from my mother. Beautiful family, from David. Love you guys, from Dad. The post was from 3 hours ago, right around the time Jake and I were getting discharged from the hospital. They weren't just ignoring my message. They were actively celebrating while we sat alone, bruised and shaken, dealing with the aftermath of nearly dying. I screenshot the Instagram story and sent it to the family chat with a simple message. Jake has a concussion. Could really use some support. Within minutes, the message showed, as read by all 7 family members. I watched the little indicators update one by one, holding my breath for a response. None came. I walked to the bathroom and locked the door, then sat on the edge of the bathtub and cried for the first time since I was Jake's age. Not from the physical pain, though my ribs felt like they were on fire. Not even from the trauma of the accident, though the sound of screeching brakes and shattering glass kept replaying in my head. I cried because the people who were supposed to love me most in the world had read about my son's injury and chosen to say nothing. Monday morning brought Detective Raymond Torres to our apartment, a stocky man with kind eyes and 20 years of accident investigation experience written in the lines around them. He sat across from Jake and me at our kitchen table, a manila folder thick with paperwork spread between us. "I need to go over some details about yesterday's accident," he said, pulling out a digital recorder. "The other driver, Brandon Walsh, is being charged with vehicular assault and driving under the influence. His blood alcohol level was .24, more than 3 times the legal limit." Jake winced from his position on the couch where he was supposed to be resting per doctor's orders. "Walsh," he repeated thoughtfully. "That name sounds familiar. You probably heard it around town," Detective Torres said. "The Walsh family runs a pretty big construction company here. Brandon is the owner's nephew." Something clicked in my memory, a nagging familiarity I couldn't quite place. "Walsh Construction. They do commercial work, right?" "Among other things. They've got contracts all over the county." Torres flipped through his notes. "Brandon was coming home from a bar in the warehouse district when he ran that red light. Security cameras caught the whole thing. You and your son are lucky to be alive." After Torres left, I couldn't shake the feeling that I knew more about Walsh Construction than I was remembering. I opened my laptop and ran a Google search, scrolling through their website and local news articles about their projects. That's when I found it. A photo from the business section of the Tribune, dated 6 months ago. Local car dealership announces major expansion. There was my father, Robert Harrison, shaking hands with a burly man in a hard hat. The caption identified him as Patrick Walsh, owner of Walsh Construction Company. My father owned Harrison Auto Group 3 car dealerships that had made him wealthy enough to retire comfortably at 62. But instead of retiring, he'd been expanding aggressively over the past year, adding service bays and showroom space to all 3 locations. I called the insurance company handling our claim, navigating through automated menus until I reached a human being. "This is Maria Rodriguez with Meridian Insurance. How can I help you today?" "I'm calling about claim number 4789B, the accident yesterday involving Brandon Walsh." "Let me pull that up for you, Mr. Harrison. Yes, I see here that the other driver was at fault. His insurance company is Pinnacle Coverage, and they'll be handling your medical expenses and vehicle replacement. Can you tell me anything about his employment or his insurance coverage limits?" "He's listed as an employee of Walsh Construction Company, and his policy has $500,000 in liability coverage. More than sufficient for your claim, fortunately." After hanging up, I did more digging online. Walsh Construction's website featured a gallery of completed projects, including several automotive dealerships. I found photos of work they'd done at my father's newest location, the one on Riverside Drive, that had been under construction for 8 months. The pieces were forming a picture I didn't want to see. Jake appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving slowly. "Dad, can I ask you something? Why hasn't anyone from the family called to check on us?" I closed the laptop. "I'm sure they're busy, buddy. You know how your grandfather gets wrapped up in work. But Aunt Sarah always texts me back right away, even when I send her stupid memes." Jake's voice carried the hurt he was trying to hide. "It's like they don't even care that we almost died." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Patrick Walsh. Heard about the accident with my nephew. Let's talk before lawyers get involved. We can work something out that benefits everyone." I stared at the message for a long moment, my mind racing. How had Patrick Walsh gotten my phone number? And what did he mean by work something out? "Who's texting you?" Jake asked. "Nobody important." I lied, but my hands were shaking as I typed back, "I'll meet with you, but only to discuss your nephew taking responsibility for what he did." His response came immediately. "Tuesday, 10 a.m. St. Mary's Hospital cafeteria. Your family understands this is a delicate situation." My family understands. I called my father's direct line at the dealership, something I hadn't done in months. Our relationship had been strained since my divorce 3 years ago, when he'd sided with my ex-wife in the custody battle, claiming I was too focused on work to be a proper single father. "Harrison Auto Group, Robert Harrison speaking." "Dad, it's Neil." A pause. "Neil, how are you feeling after yesterday?" So he did know about the accident. "Jake and I are banged up, but okay. No thanks to anyone in the family checking on us." "Now, son, that's not fair. We figured you had things handled. You always do." "Dad, Jake has a concussion. I have 3 broken ribs. We were hit by a drunk driver. This isn't exactly something I can handle alone." Another pause, longer this time. "Look, Neil, I know you're upset, but some situations require delicate handling. Brandon Walsh made a mistake, but destroying a young man's life won't undo what happened to you and Jake. Destroying his life, he could have killed us. And I'm grateful he didn't. But Patrick Walsh is a good man who's been very generous to our community. His nephew needs help, not punishment." I felt like I was talking to a stranger. What does Patrick Walsh's generosity have to do with his nephew nearly killing your grandson? "Neil, you're letting emotions cloud your judgment. This is why the family decided to let you cool off before reaching out. We knew you'd overreact." The family decided. They'd been discussing Jake's and my accident, making decisions about how to handle it, and concluded that we didn't deserve their support. "I have to go, Dad." "Neil, wait. Patrick Walsh wants to meet with you tomorrow. I told him you're reasonable when you're not worked up. Don't make me look foolish." I hung up without another word, my mind reeling. Whatever was happening here went far deeper than a simple car accident. My family wasn't just ignoring us. They were actively working against our interests. And I was going to find out why. Tuesday morning found me sitting across from Patrick Walsh in the hospital cafeteria, where just 2 days earlier I'd sat alone while Jake got his CT scan. Walsh was everything the newspaper photo had suggested. Broad-shouldered, commanding, with the kind of presence that came from decades of building a business empire. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for agreeing to meet." His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "I want you to know how sorry I am about what happened to you and your boy. Your nephew could have killed us. Brandon made a terrible mistake and he's devastated about it. The kid's been struggling since he got back from Afghanistan. PTSD, you understand. Drinking became his way of coping. I wanted to feel sympathy, but the image of Jake bleeding in that overturned car made it impossible. That doesn't excuse driving drunk. Of course not." Walsh signaled the waitress for coffee. "Which is why I want to make this right. I'm prepared to offer a settlement that will more than cover your medical expenses and lost wages. $200,000 paid immediately, no questions asked." "In exchange for what?" dropping any criminal charges against Brandon. Let the boy get the treatment he needs instead of throwing him in prison where he'll just get worse. I leaned back, studying Walsh's face. I don't get to decide whether charges are filed. That's up to the district attorney. No, but your cooperation would make a big difference. If you tell the prosecutor you've been compensated and don't want to pursue this aggressively. He shrugged. DAs listen to victims. And if I refuse, Walsh's smile faded slightly. Legal battles hurt everyone involved, Mr. Harrison. They drag on for years, cost fortunes in attorney fees, and often end up benefiting no one but the lawyers. Your father understands this. He's always been a practical man. There it was, the connection I'd suspected. You've discussed this with my father. Robert and I have been business partners for the better part of a year. He values our relationship and I value his wisdom. We both agree that the best outcome for everyone is a quiet resolution. I felt sick. My 17-year-old son has a concussion from your nephew's criminal behavior, and you've been strategizing with my father about how to cover it up. Cover up is a harsh term. We're talking about healing, moving forward. Your family cares about you, Neil, but they also understand that sometimes forgiveness serves everyone better than vengeance. I stood up, my ribs protesting the sudden movement. I need to think about this. Of course, but don't take too long. Brandon's arraignment is Thursday. If charges are going to be reduced, it needs to happen before then. Walking to my car, I called my father again. This time he answered on the first ring. Neil, I hope you listened to Patrick with an open mind. Dad, what the hell is going on? Why are you involved in this? A long sigh. Because unlike you, I understand that life is complicated. Patrick Walsh employs 200 people in this county. His company has contracts worth millions. Brandon is a troubled veteran who made a horrible mistake, but destroying him won't help anyone. It might help other families avoid what Jake and I went through. Don't be naive, son. The justice system isn't about justice. It's about politics and money. Patrick is offering you more compensation than you'd ever see from a lawsuit, and all he's asking is that you show some compassion for a mentally ill veteran. And what does he offer you in return for your help convincing me? Silence. Dad, Walsh Construction is finishing the Riverside expansion. We owe them just over $200,000 for work already completed. The truth hit me like a physical blow. If I press charges and Brandon goes to prison, Patrick pulls out of your project. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're choosing your business relationship over your grandson's well-being. I'm choosing pragmatism over emotion, something you've never been good at, Neil. Even as a kid, you always had to make everything a moral crusade. I thought about hanging up, but I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. Who else in the family knows about your arrangement with Patrick? Everyone agreed that you needed time to process before we approached you. We didn't want you making decisions while you were angry and hurt. By everyone you mean your mother, Sarah David. We had a family meeting Sunday night after Emma's party. We all care about you and Jake, but we also care about protecting what we've built. So while Jake and I were sitting at home alone, nursing our injuries, and wondering why no one cared enough to call my entire family, had been gathered around a table, discussing how to manipulate me into helping their business associate's nephew escape consequences for nearly killing us. Sarah agreed to this. Sarah's husband works for Brennan Schultz and Associates. They represent Walsh Construction in several ongoing matters. There would be a conflict of interest if this became a contentious legal battle. And David handles some of Patrick's financing through his mortgage company. Again, it's complicated. My family hadn't just betrayed Jake and me. They'd built their livelihoods around relationships that made our suffering inconvenient for them. When I got home, Jake was at the kitchen table working on homework he'd missed Monday. He looked up as I walked in, his bruised face, hopeful. Any word from the family today? I sat down across from him, my mind racing with everything I'd learned. Jake, we need to talk. For the next hour, I explained what I'd discovered. I watched my son's face change as he processed the reality that his grandparents, aunt, and uncle had chosen business interests over our well-being. So they're trying to help the guy who almost killed us get away with it. Jake's voice was quiet, but I could hear the anger underneath. It looks that way. And that's why no one came to the hospital or called to check on us? Yes. Jake stared at his homework for a long moment. What are we going to do? I reached across the table and squeezed his shoulder. We're going to make sure Brandon Walsh faces the consequences of his actions. And we're going to find out exactly how deep this goes. Even if it means the family never speaks to us again. Jake, people who would sacrifice you for money, aren't family. They're just people who happen to share our last name. He nodded slowly, and I saw something shift in his expression. The blind trust he'd always had in his grandparents and extended family was gone, replaced by a harder, more mature understanding of how the world really worked. Dad, there's something else. I heard you on the phone with Grandpa and I started thinking. Remember last month when that lawyer's office called asking about your financial consulting work? You said you'd never heard of them. Brennan Schultz and Associates. That's Uncle David's wife's firm, right? Sarah's husband's firm. I felt a chill run down my spine. What are you getting at? What if they've been using your name somehow? Like, what if this goes deeper than just the accident? My 17-year-old son had just voiced the fear I'd been trying not to acknowledge. If my family was willing to sacrifice Jake's and my safety for business relationships, what else might they be willing to do? That night, I called Detective Torres and asked if I could make an appointment to discuss the case further. Something told me the drunk driving incident was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. 3 days passed in complete silence from my family. Jake returned to school Thursday, still dealing with headaches from his concussion, but determined to keep up with his senior year coursework. I went back to work at Metropolitan Financial, where my colleagues expressed more concern for our well-being than my own relatives had shown. Brandon Walsh was arraigned Thursday morning on charges of vehicular assault and DUI. Detective Torres called to tell me he'd been released on $50,000 bail, paid immediately by his uncle's company. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. Friday afternoon, I was reviewing client portfolios when my phone started buzzing. The first call came at 2:30 p.m., then another at 2:32. By 3 p.m., my phone was ringing constantly. Missed call notifications piled up faster than I could clear them. I finally turned the phone face down and tried to concentrate on work, but the vibrations were constant. During my break, I counted 41 missed calls in just over 2 hours, all from family numbers. There were also 17 text messages, increasingly frantic. Neil, call me immediately. Emergency. Dad. Answer your phone now, Sarah. This can't wait. Call back. Mom. Please, Neil, we need to talk to you. David. The final message from my father was time-stamped at 4:47 p.m. Answer now. We need you. I almost deleted all the messages without responding. After the way they'd treated Jake and me, their sudden desperation felt like justice. But curiosity won out. What kind of emergency would make them call 41 times after ignoring us for nearly a week? I called my father's cell phone. He answered before the first ring finished. Neil, thank God, where have you been? At work, you know that thing people do to earn money? What's the emergency, Dad? The FBI raided the dealership this morning. His voice was shaking. They froze all our accounts, seized our computers, took boxes of financial records. They're calling it a criminal investigation. I felt the blood drain from my face. Criminal investigation into what? Money laundering? Tax evasion? Conspiracy to defraud the government? Neil, they're saying Walsh Construction has been using our dealerships to wash dirty money for years. Have they? A long pause. I don't know. Maybe. Patrick handled a lot of the financial arrangements for the expansion projects. I trusted him to keep everything legitimate. Dad, you don't accidentally launder money. Either you knew what was happening or you're lying to me. It started small. Patrick would buy vehicles through the dealership using shell companies, then sell them back to us at a loss. He said it was for tax purposes perfectly legal. Over time, the amounts got larger, the transactions more complex. By the time I realized what was really happening, "You were in too deep to stop. We owe Walsh Construction over $200,000. If I'd refused to cooperate, Patrick could have bankrupted us overnight." I was quiet for a moment, processing this information. What does this have to do with me? Neil, your finance background, your clean reputation, your professional licenses. You're the only one who can help us navigate this. The FBI wants to interview family members who might have knowledge of our business operations. I don't have any knowledge of your business operations. But you could become our financial trustee. Help us protect the legitimate assets while we sort out the illegal ones. The FBI said if we cooperate fully and make restitution, they might consider reduced charges. I almost laughed. You want me to clean up your mess? I want you to help your family avoid prison. My mother's voice came through the speakerphone. She'd been crying. I could hear it in her tone. Neil, we're going to lose everything. The house, the businesses, our retirement savings. David might go to jail for falsifying loan documents. Sarah could lose her law license because of her husband's firm's connections. Maybe you should have thought about that before you built your lives around criminal enterprises. We didn't know it was criminal. David's voice joined the conference call. Patrick Walsh is a respected businessman. He sits on the city council, donates to charities, sponsors little league teams. How were we supposed to know he was connected to organized crime? You weren't supposed to prioritize business relationships over your grandson's safety. Silence. Finally, my father spoke again. Neil, I know we handled the accident situation poorly. We were scared, confused, trying to protect everyone's interests. We made mistakes. You chose money over Jake and me, and we're sorry for that. But please don't let our mistakes destroy the entire family. You're the only one with clean hands in this mess. You're the only one who can help us make it right. I thought about Jake, who was probably at home right now doing homework, and wondering if his grandfather would call to check on his concussion recovery. Jake, who'd learned this week that the people he'd trusted most in the world would sacrifice him for business convenience. I'll think about it, I said and hung up. But I'd already made my decision. My family had shown me exactly who they were when Jake and I needed them most. Now that they needed me, they expected unconditional loyalty and forgiveness. They were about to learn that trust once broken isn't easily repaired. That evening, Jake and I ordered pizza and sat in our living room discussing the day's revelations. He listened carefully as I explained about the FBI raid and my family's request for help. So they ignored us when we almost died, but now that they're in trouble, they want you to save them. That's about the size of it. Jake considered this for a moment. Dad, what if there's more to this? What if they've been using your name or your credentials somehow? That phone call last month and maybe other things we don't know about. My son was developing a sharp instinct for recognizing deception. It was a skill I hoped he'd never need, but given what we'd learned about our family this week, it might serve him well. There's only one way to find out, I said, reaching for my laptop. We start digging into exactly what my loving family has been up to behind my back. What we discovered over the next few hours would make the drunk driving cover-up look like a minor disagreement. Saturday morning, I drove to my parents' house for the first time since the accident. The Tudor-style home on Elm Street had been my childhood sanctuary, the place where Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings created the foundation of what I'd thought was an unshakable family bond. Walking up the front steps now, I felt like a stranger approaching enemy territory. The entire family was assembled in the living room, my parents, Sarah, and her husband, Tom David, and his wife, Lisa. They all looked haggard, worn down by 3 days of crisis management. Emma's birthday decorations were still hanging in the dining room, a cheerful reminder of the celebration they'd prioritized over Jake's and my well-being. Neil. My mother rose to hug me, but I stepped back. Let's just get to business. I'm here to review whatever financial documents you want my help with. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in willful blindness and criminal negligence. David spread bank statements, construction contracts, and loan documents across the dining room table, while I examined the scope of Walsh Construction's money laundering operation. It was sophisticated and brazen. Fake purchase orders for construction materials that were never delivered. Shell companies buying and selling vehicles through the dealership at artificial prices. Loans secured against non-existent assets. My father's 3 dealerships had processed over $2 million in fraudulent transactions over the past 18 months. None of this makes sense without inside financial expertise. I said, scanning a particularly complex series of transfers. Someone with professional credentials had to structure these transactions to avoid automatic bank reporting requirements. "Patrick has his own accountants," David said defensively. "We just processed the paperwork he gave us." "David, I've been a financial advisor for 12 years. These documents required someone with detailed knowledge of federal banking regulations and anti-money laundering protocols." That's when I saw it. At the bottom of a loan application dated 6 months ago, a signature line for financial consultant. The name printed beneath it was Neil Harrison. The license number matched mine exactly. "What is this?" I held up the document. David and Tom exchanged glances. Sarah stared at the floor. "We can explain that," Tom said carefully. "I'm listening." Walsh Construction needed to show they had qualified financial oversight for some of their larger contracts. "We listed you as a consulting advisor to satisfy the bank's requirements." "You forged my signature." "We never forged anything," Sarah said quickly. "We just listed you as available for consultation. Tom's firm has been handling the paperwork." I felt the room spinning. "How many documents have my name and license number on them?" More glances, more silence. I spent the next hour going through every file they'd brought, my horror growing with each page. My professional credentials were attached to dozens of fraudulent transactions. Bank forms, insurance applications, federal tax documents. In the eyes of the law, I was the financial architect of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. "You've been setting me up," I said finally. "That's not what this is," my father protested. "We were protecting everyone by ensuring the proper oversight was documented." "Dad, if the FBI prosecutes this case, they're going to see me as the mastermind. I'm the one with the financial expertise. I'm the one whose name is on everything." "Which is why we need your help now," my mother said desperately. "If you cooperate with the investigation and explain that you weren't actually involved in day-to-day operations." "I wasn't involved in any operations. I didn't even know about this." "Exactly. You can testify that you were named as a consultant, but never actually consulted. It gives everyone plausible deniability." I stared at her, finally understanding the full scope of their betrayal. "You've been planning this for months. You set me up to be the fall guy if anything went wrong." "Neil, that's not fair," David said. "We were trying to protect the family business." "By sacrificing me." Tom cleared his throat. "There's something else you need to know. Walsh Construction took out insurance policies on key personnel associated with their financial operations. That includes you and Jake." The room went deadly quiet. "What kind of insurance policies?" "Life insurance, $2 million each. Patrick Walsh is listed as the beneficiary." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Someone I've never met has life insurance policies on my son and me. "It's standard business practice for high-value consulting relationships," Tom said weakly. "I don't have a consulting relationship with Patrick Walsh. I met him for the first time 3 days ago." Sarah finally spoke up. "Neil, we know how this looks, but you have to understand our position. If this goes to trial and you're uncooperative, the prosecutors will focus on you as the financial mastermind. They'll say you were running the whole operation. But if I cooperate and take responsibility, you all get to claim you were just following my expert advice." "You're young enough to rebuild your career," my father said. "You're what, 32? Even if you served a few years, you'd still have time to start over. But your mother and I are 63 and 61. David has 3 kids to support. Sarah's got her career to think about." I looked around the room at these people I'd loved and trusted my entire life. "You plan to frame me for your crimes?" We plan to protect the family, my mother said. Sometimes that requires sacrifice. Jake's words from the night before echoed in my mind. What if they've been using your name somehow? There's more, isn't there? I said. What else have you done with my identity? The silence stretched until Lisa David's wife finally spoke. Neil, when Jake was hurt in the accident, we consulted with some medical professionals about your state of mind. What does that mean? You've been under a lot of stress since your divorce, David said. Working long hours raising Jake alone, money pressures. It wouldn't be unreasonable for someone in your situation to have a breakdown. The final piece of their plan clicked into place. You were going to have me declared mentally incompetent. Only if you refused to cooperate with resolving this situation quietly, my father said. We have documentation of your erratic behavior, your isolation from family, your obsessive focus on work. With Jake's injury, your emotional instability. You'd get power of attorney over my finances in Jake's custody. We'd get the authority to make decisions that protect everyone's interests. I stood up slowly, my cracked ribs screaming in protest, including the authority to accept Patrick Walsh's settlement offer on my behalf. Neil, please sit down. Let's discuss this rationally. But I was already walking towards the door. In the entryway, I stopped and turned back to face them. I want you to listen very carefully. If any of you comes near me or my son, again, if any of you attempts to use my name or my professional credentials, if any of you tries to manipulate Jake in any way, I will make sure the FBI knows exactly how this conspiracy was planned and executed. You're making a mistake, son, my father said. We're offering you a way out. No, Dad, I'm finally seeing clearly. I drove home through downtown traffic, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd discovered. My family hadn't just betrayed Jake and me after the accident. They'd been systematically setting me up for months, positioning me to take the fall for their criminal activities while protecting themselves. When I walked into our apartment, Jake looked up from his homework. How did it go? I sat down at the kitchen table and told him everything. Every forged document, every fraudulent transaction, every element of their plan to destroy my life and steal his custody. I watched my 17-year-old son process the reality that his grandparents' aunt and uncle had been prepared to frame his father for federal crimes and have him declared mentally unfit. When I finished, Jake was quiet for a long moment. Dad, they threatened to hurt me, didn't they? When they talked about Jake having an accident, I hadn't mentioned that part, but my son was too smart to miss the implication. Yes, I think they did. So what do we do now? I looked at this remarkable kid, who'd grown up faster in 1 week than most people do in years, who'd learned that family loyalty was conditional, and that the adults he'd trusted most in the world were capable of profound evil. Now we fight back, I said, and we make sure they can never hurt anyone else the way they've hurt us. What Jake didn't know was that I'd already started fighting back. While pretending to consider their offer, I'd been recording everything on my phone. Every conversation, every admission, every threat. And tomorrow I was taking those recordings to the FBI. Monday morning I called in sick to work and drove to the FBI field office downtown. Agent Sarah Chen was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened to my story with the kind of focused attention that made me believe she'd seen every type of human betrayal imaginable. Mr. Harrison, what you're describing is a complex criminal conspiracy involving money laundering, identity theft fraud, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. These are serious federal crimes. I understand that. What I want to know is whether you're interested in inside testimony that could help you build cases against all the participants. She studied my face carefully. You'd be willing to cooperate with our investigation. I'd be willing to do whatever it takes to make sure my family faces consequences for what they've done. Over the next 2 hours, I played Agent Chen every recording I'd made at my parents' house. Her expression grew more serious with each revelation. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and whistled softly. Mr. Harrison, we've been investigating Walsh Construction for 8 months. What you've just provided gives us the inside perspective we needed to understand the full scope of their operation. What happens now? Now we need you to go back to your family and convince them you're willing to cooperate with their cover-up. We want you to gather as much additional evidence as possible. They want me to sign documents accepting responsibility for the money laundering. Sign them while wearing a recording device. The plan Agent Chen outlined was risky, but straightforward. I would return to my family, agree to their demands, and gather detailed evidence of their conspiracy. The FBI would provide me with sophisticated recording equipment and legal protection. In exchange, I would testify against all participants when the case went to trial. What about my son's safety? I asked. They've made veiled threats. We'll have plainclothes surveillance on your apartment 24/7. If anyone in your family makes any move toward you or Jake, they'll be arrested immediately. Tuesday evening, I called my father and told him I'd reconsidered their offer. Thank God, Neil. We were so worried you'd let pride destroy the whole family. I've been thinking about what you said, about being young enough to rebuild. Maybe taking responsibility for this mess is the right thing to do. I knew you'd come around. You've always been the smartest one in the family. We arranged to meet Wednesday night at my parents' house to sign the necessary documents. I spent Wednesday afternoon at the FBI office learning to operate the recording equipment hidden in my shirt button and reviewing the specific admissions Agent Chen wanted me to elicit. We need them to explicitly state that they forged your credentials, that they planned to frame you, and that they threatened your son, she explained. The clearer their admissions, the stronger our case. Wednesday night, I drove to Elm Street one last time. The recording device felt like a lead weight against my chest, but I forced myself to appear calm and defeated as I walked into my childhood home. The family was more relaxed than I'd seen them since the FBI raid. Sarah hugged me as if nothing had happened. David offered me a beer. My mother had made my favorite dinner pot roast with vegetables, like we were celebrating a reunion instead of planning my destruction. I have to admit I'm proud of you for making the mature choice, my father said as we sat down to eat. It takes courage to sacrifice yourself for the greater good. I just want this nightmare to end, I said, playing the part of the broken, defeated son. Jake and I have been through enough. After dinner, Tom spread the documents across the dining room table. Financial affidavits admitting my responsibility for structuring the money laundering operation. Testimony agreeing to testify that I'd acted independently without family knowledge. Legal documents transferring my power of attorney to my parents in case of my incarceration. This covers everything, Tom explained. Once you sign, the FBI will see that you were the mastermind and the rest of the family were unwitting participants. What if they don't believe I acted alone? Neil, you're a financial professional, David said. You have the expertise to run something like this. The rest of us are just car salesmen and small business owners. It makes perfect sense that we'd trust your guidance on complex financial matters. I pretended to read through each document, carefully asking questions designed to get them talking about their real plan. So once I'm in federal prison, what happens to Jake? He'll stay with us, my mother said. We'll make sure he's taken care of. And my assets? We'll manage everything through the power of attorney, my father said. Keep your house and investments safe until you're released. What if I change my mind later? What if I try to recant my testimony? Sarah and Tom exchanged glances. Neil, that wouldn't be in anyone's best interests, Sarah said carefully. What does that mean? It means accidents happen, David said, especially to people who can't keep their mouths shut. There it was, the explicit threat Agent Chen needed. I signed the documents with a shaking hand, partly from acting, and partly from the reality of what I was doing. These people who'd raised me, who'd been at my wedding, and Jake's birth, who'd shared Christmas mornings and family vacations, were now on record planning my destruction and threatening my son's safety. I'm proud of you, son, my father said, putting his arm around my shoulders. This is what family loyalty looks like. After I left their house, I drove straight to the FBI field office and handed over the recordings. Agent Chen listened to the key segments with a satisfied expression. Mr. Harrison, what you've just provided is enough to prosecute your entire family for conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. We'll be executing arrest warrants tomorrow morning. All of them. All of them, including Patrick Walsh and his nephew Brandon. What about the drunk driving case? Brandon Walsh will now be facing enhanced charges due to his family's attempted cover-up. And your family will be facing additional charges for conspiracy to obstruct justice in that case as well. Thursday morning, I was at my office reviewing client portfolios when my phone started ringing. This time I answered. Neil. They arrested everyone. Sarah's voice was hysterical. They came to the house at 6 a.m. with a warrant. Mom and Dad are in federal custody. They arrested Tom at his office, David at the bank. They froze all our assets. I'm sorry to hear that. You have to help us. You signed those documents. You admitted responsibility. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Sarah, I did exactly what the family asked me to do. I took responsibility for my actions. What are you talking about, Neil? You have to call Agent Chen and explain. Agent Chen? How do you know Agent Chen's name, Sarah? Silence. Unless you're assuming I've been talking to the FBI, which would mean you know that signing those documents wouldn't actually protect you from prosecution. More silence. The FBI agents who arrested you this morning also arrested Patrick Walsh and Brandon Walsh. Brandon's facing enhanced drunk driving charges due to your conspiracy to obstruct justice. Patrick's facing federal racketeering charges, and all of you are facing conspiracy charges that could put you in prison for 20 years. Neil, what have you done? I've done exactly what you taught me to do this past week. I put my family first. I hung up and turned my phone off. Through my office window, I could see Jake's high school in the distance. My son was in American government class right now, learning about concepts like justice and accountability that his own family had tried to teach him were meaningless. Tonight, I'd pick him up from school and tell him that the people who'd threatened and betrayed us were now facing the consequences of their actions. That sometimes the system works the way it's supposed to. That choosing right over easy was worth it even when it cost everything. Agent Chen had told me the trials would likely take place over the next year. There would be media attention family members pleading for forgiveness, attempts to make me feel guilty for destroying their lives. But I'd already learned the most important lesson of this experience. The people who truly love you don't betray you when you're vulnerable. They don't sacrifice you to protect themselves. They don't threaten your children to ensure your silence. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to keep. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in federal district court, looking out at the faces of the people who'd raised me. My mother sat in the defendant's section, her hair gray and thin from the stress of federal prosecution. My father stared at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. Sarah, David, and Tom whispered frantically with their court-appointed attorneys, their private lawyers long since dismissed when their assets were frozen. Tuaram. Your Honor, I said beginning my victim impact statement, the defendants in this case didn't just commit financial crimes. They systematically destroyed the trust that forms the foundation of family relationships. Judge Martinez nodded encouragingly. Over the past months, she'd heard testimony about every aspect of the conspiracy. Patrick Walsh had been sentenced to 15 years for running a criminal enterprise that laundered over $8 million through legitimate businesses across 3 counties. Brandon Walsh received a mandatory minimum of 7 years for drunk driving, causing injury, enhanced by his family's obstruction of justice. The financial crimes were serious enough. I continued. But what makes this case particularly troubling is how the defendants were willing to sacrifice family members to protect themselves. They forged my professional credentials, planned to frame me for their crimes, and threatened my teenage son when I refused to cooperate with their cover-up. Jake sat in the gallery behind me, now 18, and headed to college in the fall. The past 6 months had changed him in ways both heartbreaking and inspiring. He'd lost his grandparents, aunt, and uncle, but he'd gained a deeper understanding of integrity and moral courage. His college essay about learning to distinguish between family loyalty and enabling criminal behavior had earned him admission to 3 top universities. "My son and I could have died in that accident," I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion I felt. "Instead of supporting us in that crisis, the defendants chose to protect the criminal who nearly killed us. They valued business relationships over our lives, money over justice, convenience over truth." The sentences were everything Agent Chen had predicted. My father received 8 years for money laundering and conspiracy. David got 5 years for fraud and document falsification. My mother, who'd cooperated extensively with prosecutors, received 2 years in a minimum security facility. Sarah lost her law license and received 3 years probation. Tom's law firm was dissolved, and he was suspended from practicing law for 10 years. The courtroom was nearly empty when the sentences were read. A few reporters, the prosecution team, Jake and me. No other family members had come to show support for the defendants. The extended family that had once gathered for Sunday dinners and birthday parties had scattered when the federal indictments were unsealed. After court, Jake and I drove to our new apartment across town. We'd moved away from Maple Street after I received a promotion at Metropolitan Financial. My cooperation with the FBI investigation had earned me recognition as someone who'd chosen integrity over personal loyalty, a reputation that opened doors in the financial industry. "You okay, Dad?" Jake asked as we pulled into our driveway. "I'm okay. You?" "Yeah, I think so. It's weird, I thought I'd feel sadder seeing them sentenced, but mostly I just feel relieved." I understood what he meant. The past 6 months had been difficult but clarifying. We'd attended therapy sessions together, processing the trauma of betrayal and learning to rebuild trust in other relationships. Dr. Martinez, Jake's counselor, had helped him understand that cutting off toxic family members was an act of self-preservation, not cruelty. "Dad, can I ask you something I've been wondering about?" "Sure." "Do you ever regret turning them in? Like, do you wish you'd just taken their deal and tried to work it out quietly?" I thought about that question as we walked into our apartment. The walls were decorated with photos from the past 6 months. Jake's senior prom, his graduation ceremony, college acceptance letters, my promotion ceremony at work. Pictures of a life rebuilt on honest foundations. "No," I said, finally. "I don't regret it. What they did to us was wrong, and what they were planning to do was worse. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, but it's still right. Even when it means being alone. We're not alone, buddy. We've got each other, and we've got people who showed up when it mattered." That was true. My colleagues at Metropolitan Financial had rallied around us during the trial. Jake's teachers had provided extra support during his senior year. We'd formed friendships with other families in our therapy group, people who understood the complexity of cutting ties with abusive relatives. And then there was Elena. I'd met Elena Rodriguez 3 months ago at a support group for family trauma survivors. She was a social worker who'd grown up in a household where addiction and financial manipulation had destroyed multiple relationships. We'd bonded over coffee after group sessions, sharing stories about learning to build healthy relationships after growing up with toxic family dynamics. "Is Elena coming to dinner Sunday?" Jake asked. "If you want her to." "I do. She's cool. And she makes you smile the way you used to before all this started." That was the remarkable thing about my son. At 18, he'd survived a car accident, family betrayal, federal trials, and the complete destruction of his extended family relationships. Instead of becoming bitter or cynical, he'd developed wisdom and empathy that impressed every adult who met him. His college plans reflected that maturity. He'd chosen to study social work inspired by his own experience with trauma and recovery. He wanted to help other families navigate crisis situations and learn to distinguish between healthy loyalty and enabling abuse. Dad, there's something I want to tell you. What's that? I'm proud of you for everything you did this year. It took guts to stand up to them, and it took even more guts to see it through when things got hard. I felt my eyes fill with tears. I'm proud of you too, Jake. You could have been angry and resentful about losing your grandparents and extended family. Instead, you used this experience to become a better person. I learned from watching you. Sunday dinner with Elena was a quiet, comfortable affair. She brought homemade tamales and stories about her clients, families struggling with addiction and poverty, who reminded me how fortunate Jake and I were to have each other and stable lives. After dinner, we sat on the back porch while Jake worked on homework inside. How are you feeling about everything? Elena asked. The trials are over. Your family is serving their sentences. Jake's heading to college. You've got closure. I feel peaceful. For the first time in months, maybe years. Like we're finally free to build the kind of life we actually want instead of living according to other people's expectations. And what kind of life do you want? I looked through the window at Jake bent over his calculus homework with the same focused intensity he'd shown throughout the crisis. My remarkable son, who'd learned that family wasn't just about blood relationships, but about who shows up when life gets difficult. I want a life based on honesty, I said, where the people we care about know they can count on us, and where we can count on them, where we don't have to pretend toxic behavior is acceptable just because it comes from relatives. That sounds like a good foundation. 3 months later, Jake graduated valedictorian of his high school class. His speech was about resilience, about learning that life's most difficult experiences often teach the most valuable lessons. He talked about discovering that true strength comes not from avoiding pain, but from facing it with integrity. I watched from the audience, surrounded by Elena Jake's teachers and the friends we'd made over the past year. People who'd chosen to be part of our lives not out of obligation, but out of genuine care and respect. After graduation, Jake and Elena and I went out for dinner at his favorite restaurant. As we sat around the table laughing about his plans for college, I realized something profound had happened over the past year. We hadn't just survived family betrayal. We'd learned to build something better. The people who'd raised me had taught me that family loyalty meant enabling bad behavior, that blood relationships trumped moral principles, that convenience mattered more than truth. They'd been wrong about all of it. Real family loyalty means holding each other accountable to be better people. It means choosing what's right over what's easy. It means showing up during crisis, not creating additional crises. It means protecting children, not threatening them. Jake was right to be proud of the choices I'd made this year. But I was prouder of the choices he'd made. At 17 years old, faced with the complete destruction of his extended family relationships, he'd chosen to support justice over convenience. He'd chosen integrity over comfort. He'd chosen to build his future on honest foundations rather than compromised ones. As we drove home that night, I thought about the question Jake had asked months earlier: did I ever regret turning in our family? The answer was still no. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices, even when those consequences are severe. Sometimes protecting yourself and your children requires cutting ties with people who claim to love you, but consistently harm you. I'd learned that family isn't just about who shares your DNA. It's about who shows up when you're broken, who tells you the truth even when it hurts, who chooses your well-being over their convenience. By that definition, Jake and I had lost a family this year, but we'd also found one. If you've ever faced betrayal from people you trusted most, I want to hear your story. How did you find the courage to choose what was right over what was easy? What helped you rebuild trust in new relationships after family betrayal? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar difficult choices. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family trauma and building healthier relationships. Thank you for listening to our story. I hope it reminds you that even in the darkest moments, choosing truth and integrity over convenience and comfort is always worth it. Take care of yourselves and the people you love, and remember that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away from relationships that hurt you, even when those relationships are with family.